So the big story over the weekend continued to be the fallout from what appeared to be a criminal hammer attack on the husband of Nancy Pelosi, Paul Pelosi. Time magazine had a rundown of exactly what happened. Apparently, according to Time magazine, this would have been on Friday morning. Scott said the police chief announced that witnesses on the scene described a man in his underwear who was violently attacking Paul Pelosi with a hammer. Apparently, the police were dispatched to the Pelosi home about 2:30 in the morning after Pelosi called 911, and he kept the phone line open so personnel could hear that he needed help. The person who attacked him, which we will discuss in just one moment, appears to be a mentally ill, insane person who had a bunch of conspiracy theories that he believed about Nancy Pelosi or about January 6th or whatever, but it was a broader manifestation of mental illness, pretty obviously from everything we know about the person. The attacker, a guy named David DePape, allegedly pulled the hammer away from Pelosi and attacked him before a police officer tackled DePape. Both men were taken to the hospital. The motive behind the attack was still under investigation, according to Time. The FBI and U.S. Capitol Police are joining the San Francisco Police Department Special Investigations Division in an investigation into the attack. The PD is also working closely with U.S. attorneys and San Francisco District Attorney, according to the police chief. Here was Chief William Scott, the San Francisco Police Chief, talking about what exactly happened.
We are working closely with our partners from the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the U.S. Capitol Police, and our district attorney here in San Francisco County, D.A. Brooke Jenkins, and her team. The motive for this attack is still being determined. Mr. DePape will be booked at the San Francisco County Jail on the following charges: attempted homicide, assault with a deadly weapon, elder abuse, burglary, and several other additional felonies.
The Speaker of the House released a statement saying, quote, "Sadly, a violent man broke into our family home yesterday morning, demanded to confront me, and brutally attacked my husband, Paul. Our children, our grandchildren, and I are heartbroken and traumatized by the life-threatening attack on our pop. We are grateful for the quick response of law enforcement and emergency services and for the life-saving medical care he's receiving. Please know the outpouring of prayers and warm wishes from so many in Congress is a comfort to our family and is helping Paul make progress with his recovery. His condition continues to improve. We're also comforted by the words of the book of Isaiah. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. We thank you for your prayers and warm wishes, as well as the work you do to strengthen our democracy." So pretty quickly, this entire debate turned into, was the attacker, again, David DePape, was this attacker a radicalized Republican who decided to attack Speaker Pelosi? Because apparently, when he stormed the House, he was shouting, "Where's Nancy Pelosi?" Now, there are a bunch of theories that immediately cropped up online because of probably the way this was reported by the media and the details that were sort of leaked by the police at the very beginning of the investigation. So, for example, there were questions about whether the attacker had been let into the home for some reason, because the initial media report suggested that there was a third person present in the home who let the police in. It turns out CBS News retracted that report. The only two people in the home at the time were apparently DePape and Paul Pelosi. There are also questions about the pictures of the crime scene. It showed that the glass was apparently shattered on the outside of the home, so that made people suggest that actually the glass had been shattered from the inside. That's how the glass got outside. That's not actually how plexiglass works. You can see a lot of videos online of people who throw things at plexiglass, and the glass actually rebounds and shatters outward toward the person who is throwing, for example, a hammer from the outside. So the notion that the attack had to come from the inside of the home because the glass was blown outward, that obviously doesn't have to be true. There are also allegations that because DePape was in his underwear and Paul Pelosi was apparently in his underwear, that this was some sort of nefarious gay plot. This is being implied by a bunch of people online. The evidence for that, so far as I'm aware, does not exist at this point, considering that DePape is a famously crazy nude activist. So the idea that he would be in his underwear is not particularly shocking. And Paul Pelosi, again, was in his home, and it was 2:30 in the morning. So if he was in his boxers or something at 2:30 in the morning, that, again, is not a particular shock. There was also a lot of speculation about what exactly Paul Pelosi was saying on a phone call to 911, because the dispatchers were saying that Paul Pelosi was saying, "There's a man here named David, and he's my friend." And so the implication from a lot of folks was, well, if he's a friend, then what's he doing at your home, attacking you with a hammer? Like, what's the story here? The police are suggesting that basically DePape could hear Paul Pelosi talking, and Paul Pelosi was talking to a crazy person, had the phone line open, and so he was basically trying to calm down the crazy person at the same time that he was telling the police sort of encoded language to bring somebody. So I am sure that there will be more details to arrive. The fact that the media originally were rather incurious as about all of this is, I think, one of the reasons why a lot of theories bloom around instances like this, because the immediate media response to these questions is to pretend that the questions don't exist, or that if you ask the questions, then you're really, really super bad. When the actual media response should be to ask the questions and get good answers, and then people are satisfied with the answers or they're unsatisfied with the answers. But our media are radically incurious at this point in time because, again, the narrative that the media wish to draw from this attack, regardless of how things went down, and it's my belief, based on the facts that have been presented, that it went down pretty much the way the police said it went down, that there's a crazy person who went to Nancy Pelosi's home. Nancy Pelosi's security, by the way, is not there because the security follows the speaker. The security does not stay at the home of the speaker when the speaker is out of town. She was in Washington, D.C. at the time. So believing everything the police have to say, okay, even if you believe everything the police have to say, the entire narrative that's being drawn by the media from this is a false narrative, because the narrative the media are drawing is that this is because of cruel, evil, terrible Republican rhetoric. And this game happens every time a crazy person attacks a Democrat. Every time a crazy person attacks a Democrat, the immediate response of the entire media is, this is radicalization of the population by evil Republican politicians. We saw this with Gabby Giffords. When Gabby Giffords was shot by a legitimately insane person in Arizona, the immediate media response was, it was probably Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin had nothing to do with it. There was no evidence linking this particular human being to Sarah Palin. It didn't matter. Sarah Palin had once posted a map showing targeted districts with gun sites on them. And this meant, obviously, that this person had picked up, I guess, from the air, that the Republicans wanted Gabby Giffords to be shot. And so we've seen it with that sort of stuff. We've seen it with regard to a wide variety of Democratic politicians. We'll get to more on this in just one second. First, folks, in the spirit of spooky season, I have something really terrifying to tell you about: meat recalls. There's a lot of uncertainty that comes with buying store-bought meat. You hear about alerts and recalls every day. Recently, 44 tons of meat products were recalled from retailers in Illinois, Kentucky, and Missouri for listeria. Trade in your spooky store-bought meats for 100% American meat from Good Ranchers. Good Ranchers only sources the highest quality meat. Grass-fed, grain-finished, their steak is aged at 21 days, so every bite is tender and delicious. They're better than organic chicken, doesn't have any added hormones or antibiotics. Their seafood is caught fresh and then flash frozen and vacuum sealed to lock in the quality until you're ready to eat it. Unlike the grocery store, Good Ranchers has never had to do a recall. They have 100% satisfaction guaranteed. No costumes, no gimmicks, because with Good Ranchers, you actually know where your meat is coming from. I've had a Good Rancher steak, by the way. They made a kosher one for me. It was unbelievable. Right now, Good Ranchers is throwing a huge October feast where you can get up to 4 pounds of free meat when you go to goodranchers.com/Ben. Use code Ben at checkout. My code Ben will get you 2 pounds of better than organic chicken with any order, plus an extra 2 pounds of ground Wagyu beef on orders over $300. Go to goodranchers.com/Ben. Use code Ben at checkout. That's goodranchers.com/Ben. Use code Ben at checkout to claim your special October feast offer. Anytime there is a violent incident involving a crazy person who appears to have a bunch of internet posts that are connected to the right, the idea is the entire right is to blame. On a broad level, this is exactly what happened with January 6th. The idea was not that January 6th was people who committed criminal acts, some of whom were deserving to go to prison, and some of whom were just being foolish and wandering into the Capitol building. This was an indictment of the entire right, everyone who had voted for Trump, all 73 million people who had voted for Trump. It was an indictment of them. This is something that the left likes to do on a regular basis. Now, when the tables are flipped, then of course none of this applies. When you have a person who is shouting Bernie Sanders slogans, shooting Congress people, then we are not supposed to talk about the level of rhetoric from the left. We're supposed to immediately just assume this is a crazy person, and of course, he's responsible for his own actions. It's not Bernie Sanders' fault. By the way, I agree with that. Unless you are a person in politics who is actively advocating violence, you are not responsible for someone else's violence. I don't believe, for example, that Joe Biden was responsible for a person going to Brett Kavanaugh's house and threatening to murder his family. Because remember, this happened just a few months ago. Between the announcement, the leak of the Roe versus Wade decision, the original draft decision, and the actual release of the decision, a person fully cognizant, apparently not mentally ill, went to Brett Kavanaugh's house and tried to break into his house, wanting to break into his house, and was only caught because there were police stationed near Brett Kavanaugh's house. There was no broad-scale discussion of whether left-wing rhetoric was radicalizing people toward violence. This only applies on one side. And especially in the lead up to a midterm election, you can see the media are jumping on this because it ties directly into their broader pitch for Democrats, which is, sure, they're crappy at governance. Sure, the economy is really in bad shape. Sure, crime is going up in America's major cities. Sure, we have a major illegal immigration crisis on our southern border. Sure, the president of the United States is having to the White House men dressed as women to question him about whether children should be mutilated. Sure, all that's happening. But the real threat is to our democracy. Our democracy. And this right here is example 1A of what will happen if the Republicans take over. Mass attacks on Democratic politicians. Now, let me just say this. As a public figure, a person who's in the limelight relatively often, A person who's been threatened to the extent that the FBI actually arrested a human being for threatening to kill my family just maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I don't blame Democrats for that. I don't blame people who oppose me for that. As somebody who runs a company where we have to spend 7 figures a year in personal security for me, that is not the fault of Democrats. That's the fault of people who misinterpret what Democrats say to back their own violent tendencies. But I don't expect this sort of honesty from the other side of the aisle, and we're not seeing it. All right, guys, the rest of the show is continuing right now. We'll be getting into Elon Musk and his continuing Twitter takeover, the media attacks on Twitter, plus Democrats trying to shift their angle of attack on the midterms away from democracy and away from January 6th and more toward the economy. We'll get to that in just 1 second. If you're not a member, click the link in the description and join us.